So, I'm Bree, and today we are making franks and beans. Now, I've already finished all of my prep, and I'm about ready to start cooking, which is the scary part. So before I jump into that, I'm gonna go over everything I've prepped so that we know what's going on. The oven is already preheated to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Then I've got 2 teaspoons of butter that I have in my prep, as well as 3 tablespoons of chopped onions that we're going to saute in that butter as our first step. Then I have sliced up all of my Frankenfurters, or ballpark hot dogs in this case, and I have my beans ready to go. Now, the recipe I'm using is from All Recipes and called for specifically pork beans. However, I do not eat pork at all. It is on my no-go list. So, I've got a preparation of beans that are brown sugar hickory baked beans instead of pork baked beans or bacon baked beans. And my hot dogs are all beef hot dogs. So there are 16 ounces, or rather 15 ounces for these products of hot dog, Frankenfurts, and baked beans that are pork-free. Then next up, I have 1/3 cup of brown sugar, a teaspoon of prepared mustard, which is just the liquid mustard instead of mustard powder or mustard seed, and a teaspoon of celery salt that are all ready to go into our preparation. And that is everything you need for this recipe. So it did not say if you strain the beans or not with the water. I don't think you do. I think you just pour it all in there and that adds some liquid so that it has something to cook out. So, first step is to melt 2 teaspoons of butter in a skillet over medium heat. So we're gonna transfer over to the stovetop and get started. But first, I'm going to share some history of franks and beans that I was able to find. Franks and beans appears to have been an offshoot of an older recipe, namely pork and beans, which, although its origin is unknown, was a staple of the American diet by the mid-19th century, with a recipe being included in The American Frugal Housewife in 1832, where it was suggested that the best piece of pork to eat with beans was the head. Beans, baked or not, were first canned in the 1860s by the H.J. Heinz Company, the same Heinz Company now known for its ketchup and condiments. Mass production, however, didn't occur until 1895, and the first commercially available canned beans were produced in the 1880s. The popularity of canned beans and pork occurred during the American Civil War, when it became a wartime staple as Gilbert Van Camp, co-founder of Van Camp's Beans, secured a contract with the Union troops to supply his canned goods. After the war, soldiers familiar with Van Camp's canned goods continued purchasing them when they returned home. Up to this point, we have been talking about pork and beans, but when did hot dogs or frankfurters enter the bowl? That's actually hard to say. There is no known creator of the dish, but according to an unsourced Wikipedia line I found, it was made popular by Charles Dumberger during his time as a cook during World War II. There are no further mentions of this anywhere that I have found, but it's interesting to note. As a fun fact, there is actually a Beans and Frank Day every year in America, celebrated on July 13th. Another fun fact, July is also National Hot Dog Month in America. And Van Camp, of Van Camp's Beans, they still are around today, and they are the trademark holder of Beanie Weenie, another common name for Franks and Beans. With all of that, let's see how the cooking is going. Okay, so I've got my pan heating, And the way you tell if this kind of pan is done is you flick some water on it, and the water should instantly evaporate, which mine is. This is a stainless steel pan with no rubber grip, so it's just stainless steel. So I'm gonna put my butter in and get that started melting. Now this is on medium heat. Trying to coat the pan in all this, and I'm quickly going to put my onions in because we're going to saute onions until they're tender. And the thing with sauteing that I looked up was sauteing just basically means keep them moving. You don't want them to sit. And we're just sauteing them until they're tender, which I don't know if that's when they get brown or if that's like a caramelizing thing. Some of them are starting to pop, which is what I read the saute was supposed to be. So some of these are still feeling kind of hard. Okay, if I'm considering that saute, I don't know. I don't know when that point is. Like that, most of them are brown, but not all of them are brown. Okay, take it easy. Calm down. Are they tender? I don't know. Well, it feels like they're starting to burn at this point. So that didn't go exactly to plan. As I got to this point cooking the onions, I quickly realized that I did not know what till tender meant. That meant that as I continued cooking, looking for tender, I started overcooking them. And then I started panicking. I thought I'd ruined the onions. I thought I was about to set fire to my kitchen. And that was more anxiety than reality. But at that point, I was so worried about it, I pulled my ripcord, which is something I have given myself for most of these cooking projects that I'm going to be working on, in that my partner knows a lot more about cooking than I do. So I called him in to assist with what I needed to do to fix it. Okay, so adding the beans with the water, because that's gonna and the franks. And then I mix this until they're all incorporated and it's evenly spread. said, on medium heat. I turned it down a little bit. And then once that's mixed well, I add in this grouping of brown sugar, mustard, and celery seed. And I mix that in thoroughly. And then once that's all thoroughly mixed up, I put it in a casserole dish and pop it in the oven. And then I put this in the oven for 40 minutes at 350. And it's going in the oven for 40 minutes. And I need to stir it every like 15. So, during the onion phase, I made 3 crucial mistakes, and I've taken notes on my recipe so I can know next time I make this. Those were as follows. Number 1, the pan I used was too large for what I was cooking in it. So this meant that when I put the 2 teaspoons of butter in the pan, it didn't coat the entire pan before it was all gone or evaporating or bubbling or no longer able to slide around the pan easily. What that means when you're cooking something like onions is that they are going to stick to one hot spot. And that's exactly what happened. Was they would get stuck on this one hot spot and I'd go work on that spot and I would ignore other pieces. So everything wasn't cooking at the same time, at the same temperature, in the same conditions. And that meant that some pieces were really struggling to get any cooking time, or sweat is the term that apparently is used. And others were starting to get to like the caramelized or charred level of cooking. And that's why I was having such a hard time finding that tender level. The second problem that I had was that my onion chopping, while I thought it was fine enough to move forward, it was not. There were tiny, small, and medium sized pieces in my chop, and that meant that even if I had had the correct pan size, and even if I had been able to get an even cook on everything, the different sized pieces would have had different cooking times. The tiny pieces are the ones that end up the most charred or blackened, and the medium ones are the ones that were struggling to get a sweat. So the small ones ended up a brown, more close to caramelized look, and those are the ones that should have been the size of every piece. That way I could get an even cook. The final thing, and this one I feel ridiculous for not thinking of in the first place, is first I didn't know what they meant by, like, I know what a saute is in general. I've seen a cooking show, but I looked up, how to saute, which is basically just keep them agitated, keep them moving. And to saute means to pop. Like, that's what the translation is. But that's not what you're looking for when you're actually sauteing anything. So the instructions said to tender, which is a similar phrase to a more common one that I have heard of, and maybe that's just because I have a partner who cooks more regularly, and that is to sweat. So I was looking to cook them to sweat, which is when they start turning a little bit more translucent, but before they gain any color. I did not know what that meant, and so I was looking for a physical change that was not a change of color, but a change of texture. And that is not what I was looking for in the onions. So when my onions of different sizes and textures did not become tender, I thought I needed to keep going. And that's what caused me to overcook my onions and begin that charring and nearly burning process. So, those were the three most critical errors that I made in cooking this recipe. Even with those mistakes, none of those were big enough to truly impact moving forward with the recipe, so I did continue cooking. So I followed the next steps and we got it in the oven, and I was able to finish this recipe. In the end, the dish was fine. It came out looking exactly like it should, and it tasted okay, which is what you're looking for. I didn't burn the house down, and I didn't poison anyone, and that's a good day in my kitchen. So there were a couple things that I'm making note of in my copy of the recipe so I can improve on them in the future. The first thing was that this recipe did call for a bean with pork and a pork based frankfurter or hot dog. I substituted that for a hickory style baked bean, which did not have any pork but did have a similar ingredient list. However, the recipe does not call for any additional salt, and I think that's because of the higher sodium content in the pork. So, because of that, we needed to make an addition of salt, and that probably needed to be done when we added in the mustard, celery salt, and I mean, celery salt is a salt, but I don't think it's the same thing as like a sodium. So, when I added in that brown sugar, celery salt, and mustard mixture, I probably needed to add in some additional table salt or cooking salt. So, that I'm going to be doing in the future. Then the next thing was that this recipe was really sweet, almost overpoweringly sweet. It almost made my face pucker with how sweet it was, which for some people, they might like that level of sweetness. I like a lower level of sweetness. I'm not really a big sugar person. So, in future iterations, I'm going to do what a commenter on the original recipe suggested, and I'm going to cut the sugar in about half. So that will give it, especially since I'm using a non pork based bean, which I believe has more sugar in the baked bean mix in the first place. So having the sugar is going to be right for my iteration of this recipe. So next would be my choice in hot dogs. The hot dogs I chose more for proportional size based on keeping them the same as the beans because they were both 15-ounce containers. The hot dogs themselves were not the best quality of hot dog I've had. So choosing to buy more of a better quality hot dog that I prefer would have been better for cooking everything in because the beans themselves tasted fine. Once again, a little bit too sweet, needed a little bit more salt, but they were fine. But the hot dogs themselves did not stand alone very well without the beans to back them up. And that's because the flavor of the hot dog wasn't one that was by itself to my preference or enjoyable for me. So, moving forward, I would be using a different brand of hot dog. And then finally, because the onions were overcooked, when you sweat onions, they're going to be more sweet, of like a natural aromatic sweetness. When you get more to the charred side, according to what I've been told, that's when you get more bitterness. So there was a slight bitterness, and that was because the onions were overcooked. So moving forward, if I really need to focus on getting those onion preparations right based on where they say they need to be cooked to. So if it's a sweat, that's a more sweet level, and if it's more of a char, that's more of a bitter note. And then in the middle is the caramelization, and that one is different than the other two. So, onions, very important to get cooked up right for the right flavor profile. All of that considered, we agreed that this dish was made at normal quality. So that is a 2-star rating on our 3-star scale. So this dish will be put back into my rotation to cook again before I move on to level 2 cooking recipes. But I was really happy with the product, and I hope to improve on it next time I make it. So I will see you soon with another Sims 4 based recipe. Dag dag!